Welcome to Mobile in Black and White, Dialogue to Action. Thank you so much for joining us on Zoom and on Facebook Live. We're so appreciative that you're taking time out of your day to talk with us. We want you to interact with us as we're having this conversation about what we've learned. Over the past 5 weeks, we've been engaging with experts, community members, and others who contributed to Mobile in Black and White over a decade ago. And we're just excited to be able to really just do a recap and talk about some of the things that really have been highlights for us as we're moving through this panel, and really have been insightful about how we move forward. So thank you again for joining us. We also would like to provide just some time to say thanks to all the panelists and everyone who contributed over this 5-week period. We really were encouraged by the support that we received at the very beginning when we wanted to re-engage Mobile in Black and White as a documentary, but in part as segments. And we are just so appreciative for the opportunity to do that, to re-engage, and to have conversations that relate to the topic of race in our communities. So right now, we're just gonna have everyone just sort of reintroduce themselves so that we can make sure you know everyone who's on the panel discussion team, and then we'll move into our conversation. Rob, you wanna get us started?
Yeah, I'm Rob Gray. I used to work with faculty development at the University of South Alabama when lived in Mobile for 8 years, and helped Joelle develop Mobile Black and White, the project, which was a feature film, and also the 4 segments that hopefully some of you have seen. And now I live in Bergen, Norway, but that's not really important to this conversation. So, you know, I think it's important that we talk about these issues. Now, I thought it was important 10 years ago when we started the film, and thought it was important 10 years before that and 10 years before that. So it's very, very important that we continue these conversations and that we move forward into more than just conversations.
And Rob then mentioned director of Mobile in Black and White, also co-producing. So was our leader as we were moving through producing and creating the documentary, and did a fantastic job. You know, one of the things we get to do in our role is at the universities, we get to meet great students. And so I'd like Jennifer Curtis to introduce herself to everyone and say hello.
Hi, everyone. So honored to be here. I am a doctoral student at the University of South Alabama studying instructional design. My name is Jennifer Curtis, and I've come alongside some amazing people with some awesome talents to help develop this series of segments to have very, very, very important conversations. And as I said, just very, very honored to be here. I serve as Dr. Billingsley's graduate assistant. And yeah, here I am.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. It's truly been a pleasure to, that she would accompany us on this journey as we're moving forward with Mobile in Black and White. After Rob Gray went to Norway on his new career pursuit, after we released Mobile in Black and White, I had the opportunity to meet Ryan Noble, and he's going to tell everyone who he is.
My bad. Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan Noble. I don't do well with technology, obviously. I forgot to unmute myself. So I teach film and video production at Spring Hill College, and I have the honor of co-producing and directing Joelle's current film that we're in production on, and that probably a lot of people know about, and have been just amazed about at the work that she does, and super excited to be a part of this process and this project. She mentioned a lot of productions that we've done with students at Spring Hill, and we hope to continue those, and you can find those on the Mobile in Black and White YouTube page. We are starting to put them there. And I think I'm most excited about, the prospects of moving from conversations into specific sort of action items. And probably also very specifically, the work that can be done in Mobile. I think it's probably important, and I'm just going to take away somebody else's talking point right now, just because I can. I think it's an interesting opportunity that we have in working in Mobile to figure out ways to make changes big and small in a specific community that maybe could be modeled other places, because it seems to me that we kind of keep possibly we get stuck in conversation mode because we're talking about such huge complex issues throughout the United States and even throughout the world, right? And it's like, what can I possibly do as one person in this world? So I think we maybe need to start thinking smaller, and maybe that can move us from conversations into action, like Joelle has inspired us. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. As you can see, the Mobile and Black and White Dialogue to Action panel team is wonderful and very dedicated to providing this experience. And so thank you to each of them as we're moving forward. I'm Joelle Lewis Billingsley, an associate professor at the University of South Alabama in the College of Education and Professional Studies. And I'm also in instructional design and development. And I'm just excited to be able to collaborate and to learn more as we're figuring out how to change these outcomes that we're seeing in our community. So we're going to start with our highlights. We're going to start with, just talking about some of the things that we've learned over this period of time with these wonderful experts, community members who are doing the work and who are representing at different levels, individual, organization, and society, the work that they're doing to contribute and to make things really just change things for the better for all in our community. All right, so I guess we'll start with Ryan. Ryan, let's start with you and talk with us about your highlights, and then we'll just really have a really great conversation.
Okay, you guys have to help me. The first big one for me was, is it Terry Kelleher? Is that how you say it? I don't know how to pronounce his name. Did I say it right? Okay. Anyways, he started giving out like a list of organizations and online groups and other kinds of things like that that people could find, where they can find other people to work with, find groups to work in. I thought that was an amazing resource, and he spoke of one specific that's kind of near to me at the time, and he talked about it even some more, and that is that so much of this racial justice work, both that we've been doing, that is happening, this moment that's happening in our country around racial justice, has made it apparent to me, and a lot of the discussions just sort of reinforced that, and some of the things that he said were probably most prominent in that this is a white people problem. Black people don't have a problem with race. White people have a problem with race. So that was really powerful to me, and that even to the point where there's groups, where there's specific activist groups that are just white folks, trying to fix their own problem because this is a white folks problem. So that was a big highlight for me, because it's something I've been sort of mulling around for a while, and kind of really helped me recognize it, think of strategies around it, how to talk about it. And I hope we can talk about that a little bit more too, even in our discussion today. So I'll leave that one there, because that was kind of a big one to drop on you guys. So anyways.
Thanks, Ryan, for your reflection. Jennifer, will you share some highlights, one highlight for you throughout this series?
One of the highlights, first of all, so many to choose from. Shameless plug here. If you have not watched the series, I highly recommend you to go back. It's so rich with so many wonderful nuggets and gems to take forward into your daily life. For me, one of the things that I would like to highlight that really stood out to me was the fact that everyone wants something to do. Everyone who came to the conversation, no matter their position, no matter what preconceptions or notions that they brought into the conversation, they wanted to leave with some sort of form of direction, of instruction, of action, something to apply to change their lives and the lives of others at a societal, organizational, or international, some sort of level. And I also learned in the desire of wanting to know what to do, that there's this unknown of what to do. And I think that one of the things that we have come to understand is that there is more than one answer. There's a lot of things that can be done. There's a lot of work to do. And I really believe that just some of the panelists really were able to provide very strategic steps on things that can be done in any of those levels and any of those places, no matter, what face, what race, or what position you're in, to impact change as far as the many issues that were discussed, whether, as Ryan noted, whether they were in a specific community, whether they had to do with a specific relationship or whatever level. People want to know what action to take. And I think that's prominent for where we are as a society. And as Ryan said, who owns the problem, who has the problem, and who can fix the problem. So that was paramount for me.
We have these conversations all the time, and we a lot of times we're really building on things that the other one said, or we're connecting the dots. And so there's a lot of connecting the dots that I'm hearing, because I also agree that we want to figure out the best strategies to move into action, even though we're starting a conversation. So I just think that there's so much interconnectivity as we're thinking about this conversation and things that we've learned. Rob, you want to share some things that are one thing that you're taking it away?
Yeah, I think the main thing that hit me through this conversation process, this series of panel discussions, is that when we started this project 10 years ago, over 10 years ago, we decided that our main purpose, the main argument we were trying to make, was that we want people to stop thinking about racism as just something that individuals do, but that's something that is more institutional and more structural and systemic. And so the film is really trying to make that point as much as anything, that racism is a big thing, and it's not really valuable to go around pointing fingers and say, you're a racist, or I'm not a racist. That doesn't really matter so much. It's the broader strokes that really impacts people's lives. But through having people like Peggy and Merceria and Terry and Jim and Cynthia Tucker and Carlos and all these people giving their wonderful testimonies, the way that we can fix it, we have to do it as individuals. There's no way to address the structural issues at the top unless all of us at the bottom come together and come up with strategies together to make this happen. It has to be done locally, and then that needs to expand to the state level, and then it needs to expand to the national level, because the people who are making policies, both at the federal level and the state level, and even to some extent at the county and city level, those people are in power. And the structure is there to serve the people in power. And a lot of them, while they are doing that, they're not really aware the way that it's serving them, the way that the racial elements behind our political discourse are serving them. To the extent that they are, they should really get in trouble for it. But a lot of them aren't really aware the way that they're benefiting the whole white privilege idea that Peggy so brilliantly discusses, that most people benefiting from white privilege are blind to that benefit. They're not aware that they do it. And so we have to come together with strategies to make sure that people are aware of these issues. and are, you know, motivated that they need to change things with those issues.
I must say that when I first started working on Mobile in Black and White, it was, you know, I didn't really understand structures, and I'm still learning about them. And one of the highlights really relates to that, at least for me. It's how is it that we can continue to understand structures? And one thing I learned from this panel series is that with the experts and with the stories of the people who are impacted, we can actually create the platforms that are necessary for those particular data points to come together. So we can't understand the structures without people who know of them or have experienced them, have worked in them, and have gained expertise in them to explain them to us, right? So we are trying to really decrease the unknown parts of the structures to help us learn how to create different outcomes. And so I really think engaging experts, people who've worked in systems, and also the people who are impacted and hearing their stories is important for us as we're moving forward and trying to understand structures. And that, I believe, is something that probably will not end as it relates for me, because I think I'm continuously learning more and more about structures and realizing that as an individual, I can have an impact on the outcomes that are being produced and that are actually happening in our community. But that my individual relationships don't have as much impact on the lives of others as the structures that exist. And so although I get along with, you know, my colleagues, my team members, that is very good, but that's so different. And that's one of the keys I learned from Mobile in Black and White, so different from what I'm learning now about structures. So, you know, I think that, you know, as we're sort of engaging in this conversation, you know, anybody have any thoughts about what anyone said at this point, you know, before we keep going? Any other thoughts?
I think to your point about the intersection of individuality between my relationships and their impact versus the structural and systemic impact, I think we're at such a juxtaposition of trying to decide where to do what and when to do what with those powers that we have. And I think that because of that, I think everybody wants that one motion of like generational change, because that's how we've seen change in this particular issue. We've seen generational movements that change things for people coming behind them. And I think now, the direction is, you know, to impact that structure. I just believe the answer is you impact the structures that you're within, the structures and the systems, because you know them best. We're all here in university and academic settings. But we heard from people who were from all different types of systemic structures. Gosh, that's such a tongue tire. I mean, we heard from everything from video producers to illustrators to politicians. You know, we heard from so many different people over the course of the series to hear about their particular struggles in those areas. And I think, you know, to Ryan's point, again, that's how we kind of break down issue from this big, large, insurmountable thing to doing the work where we are. And I think that might be one of the things that I've taken from it.
Yeah, that's really well said, Jennifer. You made it much clearer than what I was trying to say. And much more real and tangible too. But I think for some reason I keep kind of getting drawn to like hearing there's still people, and a lot of people that will say there is no such thing as systemic racism, right? I mean, they just sort of out of hand say that. I do think that there's a place for us to I guess start the process. I know we've talked about it a lot, and this conversation is a good place to start. I guess it is sort of the point, and maybe that's what I'm trying to say is like the point of all these conversations should probably be starting some kind of truth and reconciliation process I know people, you hear people talk about it sometimes. They don't talk about it a lot. You know, we don't ever seem to get into it too deeply. But then all of a sudden something like this happens where there's a very, very clear evidence of systemic racism. You know, and in the face of that clarity, there are still people who say there is no systemic racism. So I totally get we're probably in some kind of post-truth world, but I think that process has to start. I'm guessing we could start it with Mobile. I don't know, but some kind of, you know, truth and reconciliation process. I mean, don't we have to do it? I guess I'm asking the whole panel, like, don't we have to do that at some point? Like, can we just keep trying everything else? I mean, don't we have to do that?
I absolutely agree. One of the things that drew me to this work was Dr. Billingsley showing me the clip from the Mobile Black and White documentary, where I think that was a documentary. Somewhere she was being interviewed. I've seen so much. And the person asked the question, and her response was so phenomenal to me. Her response was, did we ever really talk about it? You know, referencing slavery. And I often go back to that, to your statement. I often go back to, you know, did we ever talk about it? Did we have our Holocaust experience where we faced it, where we accepted it? And then we said, what are we going to do? And I'm not very old, but I've never had those kinds of experiences. I've never experienced anything like that. So yeah, I do think we do need that. And I do think there are people who are trying their earnest to just say, well, some people are going to be those people that you mentioned that just don't believe in the face of any clarity, any evidence whatsoever that it's important or that it even exists. And so they're trying to move on past those people and past those hurdles and obstacles. But yeah, I definitely think that's a first step. And I don't know where you take that step. Do you take that step in an individual level, at a societal level, organizational level, institutional level? And as Rob said, you know, how do you get to those higher positions of lawmaking, powerful bodies, if we haven't all agreed from the bottom up?
Yeah, I think that's, you know, I'm thinking about how to respond to what you guys are saying, and you keep saying new things that make me go off in a different direction. But, and I also don't want to bring in my day job into this. You know, I spend my whole day, most days of the year, talking to college professors on, you know, when you're designing a course, when you're designing a lesson, you have to think about what the intended learning outcomes are. And that's something that I think we really need to start thinking about. What is it that we want the outcomes of this process to be? Where are we trying to go with this? What do we want the world to look like when this is over? And something that struck me, I guess it was in a lot of the panels. I remember Jim talking about it. I remember getting heavier and heavier in the week 3 and week 4 about how we have to tear down these structures. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, what does this mean? You know, how radical is it? What to tear down these structures that build our society? What are we actually asking for? What are we willing to do? And are we willing as Americans, who many of us identify as Christians, do we start thinking about, okay, what am I going to fight for? What is good for me? Or what is good for my community? Am I going to pursue my own self-interest and call myself a Christian? Or am I going to go start looking for and out for the interest of others? And how do we approach that? And I think that's a big question we have to ask ourselves. What are we willing to do? And I think I said this in our first sort of preview, but one of my favorite moments in the whole project was the first time we showed segment 1 on campus at South Alabama. And we had a panel discussion, and Trace DeFuric, who was on our panel last week, you said, you know, I can go through my life and never have to think about race. As a white guy, I don't ever have to think about this stuff. And how much privilege is involved in that? And so I can, as a white person, I don't have to worry about that. I'm benefiting from it tremendously. And you could say that it's in my self-interest to not do anything about that, because I'm taking power away from me and giving it to other people. But I just can't in my heart say that I'm an American believing all these ideals about all men are created equal, and thinking about the Gospels and how can I live like that, knowing that I'm benefiting from injustice. Okay, I need to stop before I really get rolling.
Well, it's so funny, because one of my points that I am taking away from this series relates to what Rob just said about how we are looking at who we want to be as a community, and what are the standards that we're trying to reach? What are the metrics that we're using to see how well we're doing? One of the big things that I've taken away, kind of probably affirmed from the first work we did with Community Conversations, is really centered around collecting the data that helps us know how well we're doing. There may be some areas where we are doing well, but how will we know if we're not collecting the data and talking to the people who are impacted by different systems and structures? How can we know if we're doing well or not? And so that was one thing. I think there is an area for data collection in very targeted ways in our community that we need to design and implement to help us see where we are and what the changes are that we need to make. And we need to develop those metrics to help us to see how we're going to, move to better outcomes. And so I believe setting those standards, those metrics, developing ways to collect the data that we need to know to see where we are going to be really key to how we engage. Because part of it, when we start doing these conversations, like, well, how do you know there's something that's wrong? Especially if you're not experiencing these things on a daily basis, like many citizens are, how do you know that there's even a problem? Right. And so there's some work that has to be done around establishing in our community how well we're doing on the issues of race. And so that's just one of the other things I've taken away. Ryan, you want to sort of give us another point, and then we'll kind of continue the conversation. And if we have things we'd like to add about, the highlights that we're finding, let's go ahead and share them.
Okay. Well, I guess probably the biggest sort of thought I guess I've had around this is kind of what we've already said. Like, what are we going to do? Like, what is the actions we are going to take to try to make a difference? And I we said this before, and maybe we said it at the preview even. I know I keep saying it, so I'm just going to say it again. When we do these conversations, we are kind of preaching to the choir. And I mentioned this in our sort of pre-thing, but I'll let you guys maybe answer that question. Like, okay, we know everyone who's listening to us right now probably is the choir. They probably agree with 99% of what we're saying, at some level. So since we're preaching to the choir, first question, what do we really want the choir to know that they maybe don't know, right? And then B, what can we do to get the choir working? I know this came out, I think it did come out in the preview. So now that we've had all of these 5 weeks of great discussion and lots of strategies and organizations and activism possibilities and all that kind of stuff, like, what can any one individual do in general, but also what is Mobile in Black and White going to do? Jennifer, we'll let you start.
Who'd you say?
Sorry, I'm on.
Did you say me?
I'm on a really bad delay. No, I said Jennifer because I ended the end of
Okay.
the end of the question was what is Mobile in black and white going to do? And that's probably, we should probably end on you, Joelle. So we'll let Jennifer start.
Um, ooh, what is Mobile in black and white going to do? I think there are several things that the panelists shared with us from an expert position that can be done. And I think that there are several things that we've even mentioned in this conversation that can be done. All of us are in some sort of capacity at the academic level, and I think that we have an inside view from outside perspectives on how we can all individually impact our workplaces. But one of the things that I thought about that Dr. Joelle mentioned was the data, because that moves the conversation from an emotionalist perspective, because I think some of the people who are anti any of this, they argue that, oh, you're just being emotional. Oh, it's not really happening. It's your imagination. And we, to a degree, operate our society on scientific rigor and fact. And so if we can show that these experiences are real and that they are impactful through data, I think that all of us can take a part in that, whether quantitative, qualitatively, extended studies, narrative inquiries. There's so many different ways we could show that, because I think there's lots of data to be gathered. I again agree with Dr. Billingsley that there's not enough attention being paid from the academic standpoint of things. And I think that if we put a little bit of science and passion behind this, I think that would be a great motion for Mobile Black and White. Second thing I think that Mobile Black and White can do is continue doing what you're doing. I think Mobile Black and White is an excellent voice and resource in and of itself. And not to put more work on you wonderful panelists, but I do think that the work that has been done speaks for itself. Even if we are just speaking to the choir then goes out into their worlds and gathers their own choir, or gathers their own, opposers and converts them. Again, I think we give people maybe too much, maybe a lot, I don't know, but we give them a lot of pushback for maybe having opposing views, but maybe, as we mentioned before, maybe they just never heard the other side. There's a lot of things that have come out of these conversations that I've never heard before from both sides. And so I think that's important as well. So I think continuing the awesome documentaries and publications and resources that this entities are already produced, and then also continuing those conversations.
I don't want to answer this question. I mean, that's a joke, most of it. It's, I'm 4,000 miles away or whatever. It's hard for me to get on the ground in Mobile and do things. But I think it's important to, one, I think the data is important, but also I think it's important to be aware that data doesn't really ever change anybody's mind for long. Stories are what actually changes people. And so we have to be careful when we give data that we have to give it in the context of stories so that people can actually touch it and feel it and make it real. So I think that's essential. I think it's also important, and hopefully I'm not going too far afield here, but when we were making the film, especially before we had anything to show, but people knew we were doing it, probably the two most common things that people asked me about or commented on was, one, are you going to talk about how Black people are racist too? And my answer was always, we're not going to talk about how white people are racist. That's not what the film's about. And the other thing is, I just forgot what it was going to be. I'm thinking too many different directions right now. But, why would I be doing this?
I remember when they asked you that. I remember that.
Yeah, and what are you gonna, why is it your problem? And I was like, and you don't believe in white privilege. Why is it my problem? And the other thing was, and Brian Butler, who was part of our team, actually coming from television news said, are you going to show the other side of the story? And I was like, is there another side of the story that is worth giving voice to? You know, racism is not a thing where you have two opposing sides and that they're equally valid. It's not like talking about, you know, any other issue. You know, you put hardcore racist on the movie, and what is that going to accomplish? But the way our system is set up right now is that it's teams. You know, we think about our political discourse right now about everything going on. It's about which team am I on? You know, if I'm on Trump's team, then everything I do is to show that he's right and everything else is evil. The Democrats are godless, evil Satanists, and then the same thing is true. But for the other side, if you're on the left, then everybody on the right is evil. You know, so people think that Mitch McConnell is evil or that Nancy Pelosi is evil, and that there's no human redeeming qualities in that. And I think we need to get over that caricature mentality that we have of the other side. And we need to just think about what is the right, not about whose side it is or who's getting credit for it, but what is the just outcome here? What is right here? And how can we achieve that and not worry about all this ad hominem stuff where we're worried about, you know, that's a good idea, but that person believes something totally unrelated. We need to really get at what the truth is. You know, one, recognizing what the truth is, and then two, finding what it should be and what should we strive for, and coming together on that, not as to what team we're on, but what is the goal that we want, and really striving for that.
And I'm hopeful, going back to Ryan's question and adding on what Jennifer and Robert saying, I'm hopeful that Mobile Black and White can be a part of that work. You know, we do have to realize too that we're not the only ones working on this work in the community. And so I believe part of those first steps is determining how to publicly show the work that's being done in the community by other organizations that relate to race. And so that's one of the things I think we can be a part of, is unifying and bringing that group together. The other thing that I think will be really key as we're thinking about this work is having that common language, like the common language that we're using, because we all define these things differently. I believe the common language is going to be important for us to be able to have as a community so that we can be on the same page when we're talking about these issues. As we're also thinking about the choir, so going back to the choir conversation, I think knowing who the choir is so important. Right? So sometimes we're working and people are doing different work, but we want to know, I believe part of maybe what Mobile Black and White's work will be is who is the choir? And then going back to what are we singing? And so that we can be on the same songs and, or at least similar, right? So maybe not doing the same work, but just as Jennifer mentioned earlier about the complexity of this work in the community, there's enough for everyone to be able to do. But if we can unify and be strategic about that work, I think that we want to be, and I say we, Mobile Black and White wants to be a part of that strategic work and making sure that these particular ways that we're engaging in the community are effective, that we're not only using best practices, but also thinking wrong about this. And I say thinking wrong in relation to the book that I'm using for one of my courses, but basically thinking outside the box, being innovative, and not only utilizing things that have worked in the past, but also looking for new strategies and new ways for us to engage in the community. And so moving in that, I'm wondering, Jennifer, do you want to have another highlight or something that you want to, that you've taken away from the work? And then we'll move to Rob.
Now I kind of feel like Rob with all of the thoughts rolling around, and it's like, whoa, wait, gotta come out of that. I mentioned, you know, the action piece, you know, I think we've discussed early here. That's something that I took from the series. I think along with the action piece, I think, wow, it's just so many things. that are rolling through my head. I think one of the things that Rob kind of touched on that I would like to highlight is that most people that do want to do this work or that are interested in seeing the progression of it not being a you versus you, left versus right, right versus wrong, they do have a teamwork mentality to really work along other people. I mean, even this work in and of itself, you guys were able to gather people who, no matter what they personally believed or where they personally stood, they wanted to see this issue progress from where it is to those future innovative things that you just mentioned. So I think that a lot of the people that you can use to leverage and partner with you have that like mind. And I think Ryan's kind of made mention about this as well, kind of those middle ground people who aren't really sure what to believe. Maybe they were raised to believe one thing and they now have another view, or they're not totally in agreement with what they were trained to believe, but they're not actually sure what to believe. So I think pulling in some of those middle ground people to leverage moving forward. And I agree completely with Rob's perspective. And I think that was reiterated through the panelists, all of the panelists, is that this is a team effort and that it's not about who gets credit. It's not about, who gets the glory necessarily, that we have to unify around a common goal. And I think those groups, and there's several, but those groups that do unify around those common goals, they normally get the outcomes that they're seeking. So I think that taking that forward, maybe not always taking on the entrepreneurial spirit of let's start something new, but who can we partner with? Who's already doing the work? Who's leading the way in these capacities? And what can I do to contribute? Maybe I don't have to take on the whole pie, but if I can give an ingredient or if I can do a part in the process, I think we'll all reap the beautiful benefits. So that is kind of my encouraging highlight to myself, and that I would like to share with others, that, it may seem a lot larger, a lot more vast and more insurmountable because of all of the hoops and loops and obstacles. But in all, I think that partner with your people and you'll find very quickly who your people are. But don't just partner with people that look like you, because you need the diversity of that perspective to really give a holistic picture to that. So I thoroughly enjoy this work. I thoroughly enjoy working with people that don't look like me, that don't think like me, that have pushed me, as far as everything from Facebook comments to chats, and that have opened my eyes to even things that I didn't know to think about. So it's been a blessing for me. And I'm pretty sure like all of the panelists would agree, directly or indirectly, that that is how they arrived to where they are with this issue. So that was kind of one of the more latent things that I've taken from this, but I definitely want to share that with you all.
Thanks, Jennifer. That's wonderful. I'm so glad that this platform is enlightening you in that way, and I'm hearing that from others as well, that they've had the opportunity to engage and to listen and to practice listening and hearing others. And I'm just so appreciative and glad that that was part of the experience for you. Really glad about that. I guess we can figure Ryan or Rob next, but as we sort of thinking about this sort of last sort of hopeful and also highlight from the series.
I think that it's important to remember that most people are good people, and that's a quote from Fry Gaillard in the film. But that, everybody, no matter what their position is on this issue, they think they are right, and they think they are doing the right thing, and they're taking the right approach. And I think very few people, there are some, but the vast majority of people aren't acting in ill will. That they really think that they're right. And where I like to problematize that is that, I generally think of myself as a fairly smart guy, and I'm almost never confident that I'm right. There's always a doubt that no matter what I say, no matter how researched I am, no matter how much thought I've given it, I'm always afraid that what I'm going to say is wrong. And I think we all need to take that approach to never trust in our rightness, that we need to be willing to listen to other sides and other perspectives and other possibilities, and finding that, dwelling in that uncertainty and actually finding comfort in that uncertainty, because once you're certain, you're probably wrong, and be mindful of that.
Yeah, so I'm not as smart as Rob, so I think I'm always very right.
You are, you just don't have a good internet connection.
I'm certain. I'm always pretty certain until about the time I finish the sentence. And by the time I finish the sentence about saying something that I feel really certain about, I'm like, I really wish I hadn't just said that. But anyways, I think the thing that kind of, that I guess I'm going back to Rob's last two comments, and that is this piece around how do we engage what Jennifer called the middle ground, right? The people at the margins. I'm going to call people at the margins, even though they probably really are in the middle. Like, we usually talk about people at the margins being outside or whatever. But I think there are a lot of people that identify generally as, you know, well, I guess that's my point, that their identity. So I'm trying to bring in sort of what Joelle was saying around language, and what Rob was saying about white identity, and what Jennifer was saying about those people that, you know, might be movable. And then of course, getting back to what Rob was saying about certainty. I think everybody feels like they're certain. I don't think they think that they know that they're right. I think that they really believe that they're certainly right. And that's a big problem. The language that we use, what's happening, I think what's happening is it is a direct sort of affront to white identity. And so people who identify as that sort of traditional American white Christian nationalist is resentful that their identity is being called into question. And if anybody ever thinks, if you ever think about anytime you've ever been resentful in your life, the first reaction you get from somebody saying something about that is you get defensive. And it feels like someone's being very sensitive when they get really defensive, right? And that sensitivity turns into this, you know, what we were kind of talking about before, and I'm just going to throw it out there, this idea of white fragility, right? And this goes to the language thing in my perspective, in my humble opinion, right? That it's not actually white fragility, it's white resentment that becomes defensive and feels sensitive, right? And so that's an example in my mind of like how we need to discover other kinds of language to more directly both resolve that sort of language problem, but also find middle ground. Like, why are we making white people resentful, right? Like, and I don't mean we as the whatever, I'm just talking about, you know, whatever gets said and gets resented, you know, then now we have this problem, right? So, so I think that's, you know, that's such an important part of this process in both discovering what it really is that people have a problem with, and then being able to talk about it with language that both people or both sides recognize, understand, accept as a way of moving forward. And I think that feels impossible, but I think with the right language and the right sort of concepts around that, I think it might actually be possible. What do you guys think?
Definitely think it's possible. I do believe that at some point, you know, we do want to create more understanding by having conversation. And some of that does mean that, you know, you sort of need to be able to model what those conversations look like. And I do think it's possible. But I'm a very positive person all the time. So I would say, yes, it is possible. And I think that there are some comments in the chat that relate specifically to that. We have a question about like creating a common good in an individualistic society. And how do we do that? Also thinking about, you know, if we're talking about what our goals are, like really being specific about that. And also thinking about like, how do we as Mobile and Black and White possibly facilitate a public discussion for citizens that they would, you know, to be a part of what that could be and allow the citizens to, you know, really have a voice in this. And I definitely think that's part of what this platform could be in terms of allowing that voice to be heard and to be able to be disseminated to people if they're, you know, people who are in positions where decisions are being made that impact all citizens and impact communities that are being negatively impacted by structures. Surely this is important for us to be able to make sure that those voices are heard and being a platform for those voices. I definitely think that's something that that we could do. And so, you know, as we're looking at part of what we'll be doing moving forward is looking at our chat, looking at all the comments. So continue to make them. This is part of how we'll be determining the direction that's moving forward for Mobile and Black and White. And any other comments from the panel before we start talking about some of the things we're doing to move forward? Anybody else have any comments? Everyone's kind of said their hopeful part and also, you know, some of the things we've learned. So thank you again, panelists, for just being so willing to learn and modeling basically what you talked about, like willing to be wrong, willing to be vulnerable, to share. And that's part of what I believe, hopefully we're modeling for the community with Mobile and Black and White, is that these conversations are important and it does require for us to be able to grow in these ways. So thank you again. One of the things that we've been talking about is how we move forward. And as Mobile and Black and White, we're really thinking about examining quality of life in Mobile and how we best do that. And so that's really the way that we're looking to be able to get engaged in the future. We're in the process of identifying, talking to experts in our community around data, determining what types of data can be collected and shared, and then also thinking about what types of things we need to do as a community to examine the quality of life for citizens of Mobile. And so that's the direction that we're moving. We'd love to hear your thoughts on that as we're continuing to plan, as we're continuing to figure out what types of things are next. But just know that Mobile and Black and White will be a part of the action. And we'd love for you to come along with us as we're engaging other entities that are doing this work in the community around race, as we're considering how to, you know, organize events and things that are happening. How do we help the public know what's actually happening? One of the recommendations from County Commissioner Ludgood was a community calendar. And so we'll look to be a part of what that can look like for the community. And then also thinking about any of the things that that we talk about from the community input from the chat and those areas. We'll also be looking at those as options and ways to move forward. So we appreciate you joining us, and we also appreciate your conversation and your input as we are being a part of the solution and moving from dialogue to action. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.